The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning. There was nothing unusual about the mail that day. Utility bills, advertisements, a local newspaper folded carelessly into the mailbox. Yet beneath the ordinary pile rested a yellowed envelope that immediately caught Ethan Carter's attention. The paper looked decades old. Its edges had darkened with age, and the stamp carried a postal mark dated 25 years earlier. That alone made no sense. The address had been written by hand in faded blue ink. Ethan Carter. Not current resident. Not his parents. His name. He turned the envelope over. No return address. Only a wax seal that had cracked long ago during delivery. Ethan stood in the driveway for nearly a minute before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No greeting. No signature. Only one sentence. If you ever see the last train to Black Hollow, do not get on it. He read the sentence 3 more times. Nothing else. No explanation. No clue about the sender. His first assumption was that it had to be some kind of prank. Someone had found an old envelope and mailed it years later. Except the postmark wasn't fake. His father had died exactly 25 years ago. The same week the letter had supposedly been sent. That coincidence bothered him far more than the strange message itself. Ethan worked as an investigative journalist in Chicago. His career had been built on exposing frauds, political scandals, and carefully hidden lies. He trusted evidence, documents, and facts. Ghost stories didn't interest him. Urban legends paid no bills. But the letter stayed on his desk all day. Every few hours he unfolded it again. The handwriting felt strangely familiar. Not because he recognized it. Because it reminded him of someone. Late that evening curiosity finally won. He searched every public database he could access. There wasn't a single town in the United States officially named Black Hollow. No municipality. No registered village. No abandoned settlement. Nothing. Railway archives produced the same result. No station. No route. No train. It was as though Black Hollow had never existed. That should have ended the mystery. Instead it only made him more interested. Over the following week Ethan dug through newspaper archives stretching back nearly a century. Eventually he found something. One article. Printed in 1974. Barely 6 lines long. Rail service suspended after unexplained disappearance near Black Hollow Junction. Officials declined further comment. No location. No map. No photographs. The following day's newspaper contained no follow-up. The story simply ended. When he searched for Black Hollow Junction itself, nothing appeared. The article shouldn't have existed. Yet there it was. His editor noticed the growing stack of photocopies on Ethan's desk. Normally he would have dismissed the story immediately. Instead he smiled. Sometimes the strangest stories make the best headlines. Ethan decided to take 2 vacation days. Officially, he planned to visit his late father's hometown in Pennsylvania to organize old family belongings that still remained inside his grandmother's abandoned farmhouse. Unofficially, he wanted answers. The drive took nearly 10 hours. Rain followed him most of the way east. By the time he reached the farmhouse, evening had already settled across the hills. The house hadn't changed much since childhood. White wooden walls. A rusted weather vane that no longer pointed north. An old porch swing moving gently despite the complete absence of wind. Dust covered nearly every room. His grandmother had passed away years earlier, leaving the property untouched ever since. Ethan spent the first evening sorting boxes stored inside the attic. Family photographs. Old tax records. Military medals. Birthday cards. Nothing unusual. Until he opened a small cedar chest tucked beneath the farthest window. Inside lay dozens of notebooks belonging to his father. Travel journals. Most contained ordinary entries. Business trips. Fishing weekends. Family expenses. Then one notebook suddenly stopped. Not because it ended. Because every remaining page had been torn out. Only the inside cover remained. Written there, in the exact same handwriting as the mysterious letter, were 6 words. Never wait for the midnight train. Ethan's heartbeat quickened. He compared the notebook with the letter. Every curve. Every letter. Every stroke matched perfectly. His father had written both. But why? He continued searching the attic until well after midnight. Hidden beneath another stack of boxes he discovered an old railway timetable. Most routes had long since disappeared. One line, however, had been crossed out repeatedly in black ink. Black Hollow Junction. Departure. 11:59 p.m. No arrival time listed. Only one destination. Final stop. The paper slipped slightly in Ethan's hands. The timetable couldn't be modern. The railway company printed across the top had gone bankrupt almost 40 years earlier. Still, tomorrow's date had been circled in red. He stared at it for a long time. His father hadn't simply crossed out the route. He had marked a specific day. Tomorrow. The following evening Ethan drove toward the nearest surviving railway station mentioned in the timetable. According to every online map, the station had been permanently closed in the early 1980s. Yet after nearly an hour of driving through endless forest roads, he found it. The building stood exactly where the timetable suggested. Dark red bricks. Broken windows. A weathered station clock frozen at 11:59. No lights. No people. No parked cars. Only silence. The platform looked abandoned for decades. Weeds pushed through cracked concrete. Rust covered every inch of the tracks. Nothing had passed here in years. Ethan checked his phone. 11:54 p.m. No signal. The battery icon flickered strangely before settling again. He laughed quietly to himself. He had driven hundreds of miles because of an old family mystery. In 5 minutes he would prove there was no train. No black hollow. No supernatural secret. Only coincidence. 11:56. A cold wind swept across the empty platform. 11:57. The station lights turned on. One after another. Without electricity. Old lanterns hanging beneath the roof suddenly glowed with soft yellow light. 11:58. Somewhere deep inside the surrounding forest, a train whistle echoed through the darkness. Long. Low. Impossible. The rusty rails beneath Ethan's feet began vibrating. Not slightly. Violently. Fresh steel slowly appeared beneath the rust. As though decades of decay were peeling away in reverse. The cracked platform looked newer. Paint returned to faded signs. Dust disappeared from forgotten benches. The abandoned station wasn't being repaired. It was becoming young again. Ethan stepped backward. Every instinct told him to leave. Instead, he remained standing exactly where he was. At precisely 11:59 p.m., a black steam locomotive emerged silently from the fog. No smoke. No sparks. Only darkness. The train slowed to a perfect stop in front of him. Above the first carriage, an old destination board illuminated itself. Last stop. Black Hollow. Every window revealed passengers sitting perfectly still. None spoke. None moved. Every face looked pale beneath the dim cabin lights. Then, one passenger slowly turned his head. A middle-aged man wearing a long gray coat looked directly at Ethan. He smiled. Not with surprise. With recognition. As though he had been waiting for Ethan. For a very long time. The locomotive came to a stop without making a sound. That was the first thing Ethan noticed. A steam engine should have hissed with escaping pressure. Metal wheels should have screeched against steel rails. The heavy machinery should have vibrated beneath its own weight. Instead, silence. The train stood before him as though it had never been moving at all. The black paint reflected almost no light from the old lanterns above the platform. Every carriage looked immaculate despite appearing to belong to another century. Brass handles gleamed as though polished only moments earlier. Above the conductor's door hung an old iron clock. Its hands remained frozen at 11:59. Ethan checked his phone again. 11:59. The seconds no longer moved. His battery displayed 84%. A moment later. 81. Then. 86. The number continued changing every few seconds without explanation. His phone searched endlessly for a network. Nothing. The station behind him had transformed completely. The broken windows were gone. Fresh paint covered every wall. The cracked benches looked brand new. Even the faded advertisements now displayed colorful posters for products that hadn't existed for generations. It wasn't simply restored. It looked as though time itself had reversed. The passenger who had smiled at Ethan remained seated beside the window. He hadn't looked away once. His expression never changed. It wasn't welcoming. It wasn't threatening. It carried the quiet confidence of someone who already knew how the night would end. A soft click echoed from the locomotive. One of the carriage doors slowly opened by itself. Warm golden light spilled onto the empty platform. No conductor stepped outside. No announcement followed. The train simply waited. Ethan remained where he was. He remembered the letter. If you ever see the last train to Black Hollow. His father had warned him. Not once. Twice. First in the notebook. Then in the letter. Every logical part of his mind insisted that he leave immediately. Yet every instinct that had made him a journalist whispered something else. If he walked away now, he would never know why. He slowly approached the open door. Inside, the carriage looked impossibly luxurious. Dark mahogany walls. Polished brass lamps. Deep red velvet seats. Not a single scratch or stain anywhere. The passengers remained perfectly still. Perhaps 20 of them. Men. Women. An elderly couple. A teenage girl reading a worn leather book. A businessman holding a briefcase. A little boy wearing clothes decades out of fashion. No one spoke. No one blinked. Every passenger looked toward the windows. Except the man in the gray coat. His eyes remained fixed on Ethan. The stranger slowly lifted one finger. Not beckoning him. Pointing. Toward the empty seat directly across from him. Ethan didn't move. The train whistle sounded again. This time much closer. Somewhere behind him. He turned instinctively. The platform had disappeared. The station building was gone. Beyond the train stretched only thick white fog. The parking lot where he had left his car no longer existed. Nor did the road leading into the forest. Everything outside the rails had vanished beneath endless mist. His heartbeat quickened. That wasn't possible. He stepped backward. His foot met nothing. The edge of the platform had disappeared as well. Only darkness waited below. He looked toward the train again. The open doorway remained the only visible place left in the world. Slowly. Almost without realizing it. He climbed aboard. The moment both feet touched the wooden floor. The carriage door closed behind him. Not loudly. Just one quiet click. Every lamp inside flickered once. Then the train began moving. Still. Without sound. Ethan hurried toward a window. Nothing outside. Only white fog flowing endlessly beside the glass. No trees. No mountains. No stars. No sky. The world beyond the train simply didn't exist anymore. He tried opening the carriage door. The brass handle refused to move. Locked. He walked quickly toward the opposite end. Another door. Also locked. Every window felt strangely cold beneath his fingertips. The glass itself seemed thicker than normal. Almost impossible to see through. The man in the gray coat finally stood. He appeared to be in his late 50s. Neatly combed silver hair. Clean-shaven. Dark gray overcoat buttoned all the way to the collar. He carried no luggage. No ticket. No hat. Only a gold pocket watch attached to a thin chain. Without speaking, he crossed the aisle and stopped beside Ethan. For several long seconds they simply looked at one another. The stranger's eyes carried an exhaustion that seemed far older than the man himself. Then he reached inside his coat. Ethan instinctively tensed. Instead of a weapon, the man removed an old newspaper. He handed it over. The date immediately caught Ethan's attention. October 18, 1999. Exactly 25 years earlier. The front page headline froze the blood in his veins. Local journalist disappears after investigating Black Hollow. Beneath the headline, a photograph. Ethan stared at it in disbelief. The missing journalist was his father. He looked up instantly. The gray-coated man remained silent. He simply nodded once, as though confirming what Ethan already knew. Ethan opened the newspaper with trembling hands. The article ended halfway through a sentence. The remaining text had vanished beneath dark stains that resembled old water damage. Only the final readable paragraph remained. Authorities searched the abandoned railway station throughout the night but found no trace of Ethan Carter's father. His car remained parked beside the platform, while witnesses reported hearing a train that officially ceased operating decades ago. Ethan read the paragraph again. Then a third time. His father hadn't died in an accident. He had disappeared. Exactly here. Exactly like the article from 1974. Exactly where Ethan now stood. The train suddenly lurched. For the first time since boarding, a sound echoed through the carriage. Not wheels. Not machinery. Footsteps. Coming from the roof. One pair. Then another. Then dozens. Heavy footsteps slowly crossed from one end of the train to the other. Every passenger lowered their heads simultaneously. The teenage girl quietly closed her book. The businessman shut his briefcase. The little boy covered both ears. Only the gray-coated man continued watching Ethan. His calm expression changed for the first time. Fear. Real fear. He slowly raised one finger to his lips. A silent warning. At that exact moment, something enormous stopped walking above Ethan's seat. The footsteps ceased. Complete silence returned. Then, very slowly, 3 deliberate knocks echoed from the ceiling directly over his head. The 3 knocks echoed through the carriage with unnatural precision. Not loud. Not violent. Just slow enough to make every second between them feel endless. Knock. A pause. Knock. Another pause. Knock. The entire train seemed to hold its breath. Ethan looked upward. The ceiling was made of polished oak panels, perfectly smooth, without the slightest crack or opening. Whatever had been walking above them shouldn't have been able to stand there at all. Yet something had. And now, it had stopped directly over him. No passenger dared move. Even breathing became quieter. The gray-coated man slowly lowered his eyes toward the floor. The teenage girl gripped the edges of her leather book so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The little boy buried his face against his mother's shoulder. Nobody looked at the ceiling. Nobody acknowledged the sound. The silence lasted nearly a full minute. Then, the footsteps resumed. Slow. Heavy. Moving toward the front of the train. Only after they faded into the distance did the passengers begin breathing normally again. The gray-coated man finally spoke. His voice was barely louder than a whisper. You looked. Ethan stared at him. What was that? The man ignored the question. You looked at the ceiling. I heard someone. I know. Who is it? The stranger closed his eyes. You don't ask questions about the roof. Ethan frowned. I just did. You won't again. The certainty in the man's voice unsettled him more than the warning itself. He glanced around the carriage. Several passengers were secretly watching him now. Not openly. Only through reflections in the dark windows. The businessman adjusted his tie without taking his eyes off Ethan. The elderly woman clutched a silver cross hanging around her neck. The teenage girl quietly reopened her book. This time Ethan noticed its title. There wasn't one. Every page appeared completely blank. Yet her eyes moved as though she were reading. He took a cautious step toward her. The gray-coated man immediately caught his wrist. Leave her alone. Why? Because she's already reading your chapter. Ethan slowly looked back. What does that mean? The stranger released his arm. You'll understand. I'd rather understand now. A faint smile crossed the man's tired face. So did I. The answer sounded older than the man himself. As though it belonged to someone who had asked the same question many years before. The train continued moving through endless white fog. No stations appeared. No scenery. Only darkness beyond the windows. Ethan checked his phone again. Still 11:59. The battery now displayed 42%. He hadn't used it enough for that. He opened the camera. The screen showed only static. He switched to the front camera. His own face appeared. For less than a second. Then another face replaced it. Older. Bearded. The same eyes. His father's face. Ethan dropped the phone. It struck the wooden floor with a dull sound. When he picked it up again, the front camera worked normally. His own reflection stared back. Pale. Confused. He quickly turned the phone off. The gray-coated man had seen everything. You saw him. Ethan nodded slowly. My father. The stranger looked toward the window. He rides this train too. Ethan's heartbeat nearly stopped. What? Or he did. What does that mean? The man didn't answer. Instead he reached into his coat once more. This time he removed an old ticket. Yellow. Worn. The ink had almost disappeared. He handed it to Ethan. Across the top were printed the words. Black Hollow Railway. Passenger name. Thomas Carter. Ethan's hands trembled. Thomas Carter. His father's name. The departure date matched the newspaper article exactly. 25 years ago. The arrival section remained blank. No destination. No time. Nothing. Only one handwritten note across the bottom. Seat 27 never empties. Ethan looked around the carriage. Every seat carried a small brass number. He counted silently. 21. 22. 23. The numbers continued toward the rear. 26. Then. 27. The seat stood directly behind him. Empty. Unlike every other seat in the carriage. Its red velvet cushion showed no dust. No wrinkles. As though someone had stood up only moments earlier. Without realizing why, Ethan stepped closer. The closer he came, the colder the air became. He stopped beside the seat. Something lay tucked between the cushions. A folded photograph. He carefully pulled it free. The picture showed a family standing beside the exact station where he had boarded. His grandparents. His father. A little boy. Himself. He couldn't have been older than 5. The date written on the back froze the blood in his veins. Tomorrow. Not a year. Not a calendar date. Only one word. Tomorrow. A memory surfaced suddenly. Not clear. Only fragments. His father kneeling beside him. Rain falling. A train whistle somewhere far away. Then one sentence. If you ever hear it. Everything else vanished. Ethan squeezed his eyes shut, trying to remember. Nothing. The memory dissolved like smoke. The lights inside the carriage flickered. Once. Twice. Every passenger immediately looked toward the front of the train. A brass speaker mounted above the door crackled softly. An old conductor's voice echoed through the carriage. Calm. Emotionless. Next stop. A long pause followed. Memory inspection. Every passenger reached into their pockets at exactly the same moment. One by one, they removed small objects. A wedding ring. A child's drawing. An old military medal. A faded birthday card. A dried flower. Each person held their object tightly. As though their life depended on it. Ethan looked at the gray-coated man. What are they doing? The man's face turned pale. They're choosing what they're willing to lose. Before Ethan could ask another question, the train began slowing down. Outside the windows, the white fog finally disappeared. Beyond the glass stood a platform. Not abandoned. Crowded. Hundreds of people waited beneath dim lanterns. None of them moved. None of them blinked. Every single one of them had Ethan's face. The platform stretched farther than Ethan could see. It wasn't a station in any ordinary sense. There were no signs. No ticket booths. No clocks. Only endless rows of silent people standing beneath old iron lanterns that burned with pale yellow flames. Every face belonged to him. Some looked younger. Some much older. One version appeared to be a teenager wearing his high school football jacket. Another had gray hair and deep wrinkles. One wore military fatigues. Another a doctor's coat. A small boy clutched a stuffed bear Ethan vaguely remembered owning as a child. Hundreds. Perhaps thousands. Every possible version of himself stood motionless outside the train. The locomotive stopped without a sound. The carriage doors remained closed. Nobody inside moved. Nobody outside blinked. The conductor's voice returned through the brass speaker. Memory inspection begins in 3 minutes. A strange tension spread through the carriage. Passengers carefully held their chosen objects closer. The elderly woman kissed her silver cross. The businessmen stared at an old photograph of 2 children. The little boy wrapped both hands around a cracked toy train. Only the gray-coated man held nothing. Ethan noticed immediately. "You don't have anything." The man looked at his empty hands. "I used to." "What happened?" "I traded it." "For what?" The man smiled sadly. "Another ride." Ethan frowned. "What does that mean?" Instead of answering, the stranger looked toward the platform. "You should choose." "I don't have anything." "You do." Ethan searched his pockets. His wallet. His phone. Car keys. A notebook. Nothing sentimental. Nothing personal. Then his fingers touched folded paper. His father's letter. He had forgotten it was still inside his jacket. He slowly removed it. The old paper looked exactly as it had the day it arrived. Not a new crease. Not a faded word. Only one sentence remained written across the page. "If you ever see the last train to Black Hollow, do not get on it." The gray-coated man's expression immediately changed. "Hide it." "Why?" "Because they must never see that." "Who?" He didn't answer. The carriage lights dimmed. Outside, every version of Ethan suddenly raised their heads at exactly the same moment. Thousands of identical eyes stared directly toward the train. Toward him. A slow metallic click echoed through the carriage. The door at the far end opened. Someone entered. Not the conductor. A woman dressed in a perfectly pressed black uniform stepped inside. She looked to be in her 40s. Dark hair tied neatly behind her head. White gloves. A small brass badge over her left pocket simply read, "Inspector." She carried no ticket punch. No clipboard. Only a small leather book. She walked slowly down the aisle. Every passenger lowered their eyes as she approached. She stopped before the elderly woman. Without speaking, she extended one gloved hand. The woman reluctantly placed the silver cross into it. The inspector opened her leather book. Touched the cross gently. Closed the book again. When she handed the cross back, it had changed. The metal remained identical. The chain was the same. But the elderly woman's face suddenly became blank. She stared ahead without recognition. As though something inside her had quietly disappeared. No tears. No fear. Nothing. The inspector moved to the businessman. His photograph vanished into the leather book. Returned seconds later. The businessman smiled. Then quietly whispered to himself. "I don't remember their names." He folded the photograph and slipped it back into his pocket. His expression remained peaceful. almost relieved. Ethan looked toward the gray-coated man. What is she doing? Taking payment. For what? The journey. The inspector continued moving from passenger to passenger. Each object returned unchanged. Each person became slightly emptier. A little less alive. A little less themselves. Finally. She stopped in front of Ethan. Her eyes met his. They weren't cruel. They weren't kind. Only impossibly tired. She extended one white-gloved hand. Ethan didn't move. The inspector waited. The silence stretched. Finally, the gray-coated man whispered. If you refuse. Then what? I've never seen anyone refuse. Ethan slowly held up the folded letter. The inspector reached for it. The instant her fingers touched the paper, everything changed. The lights exploded. Every lantern outside the train went dark. The leather book fell from her hands. For the first time, emotion appeared on her face. Shock. She looked at the letter. Then at Ethan. Then. She whispered 2 words. He warned you. The entire carriage fell silent. Every passenger slowly turned toward Ethan. Even the versions of himself outside the train began moving. One by one. They smiled. The inspector took one frightened step backward. You shouldn't exist. Before Ethan could react, the train violently lurched. Not forward. Sideways. The windows shattered simultaneously. The white fog rushed into the carriage like freezing water. Outside, the platform had vanished. Every version of Ethan was now running alongside the moving train. Not chasing it. Keeping pace with it. Each one smiled wider than the last. Then Ethan noticed something impossible. They weren't running on the ground. They were running across the empty air beside the train. Their feet touched nothing. One older version of himself reached the broken window beside Ethan. He pressed both hands against the frame. His lips moved. This time Ethan could read them clearly. Don't let them check your memories. The older Ethan suddenly looked terrified. Something grabbed him from behind. Invisible hands pulled him backward into the white fog. He disappeared without making a sound. The train accelerated. The remaining versions continued running. One after another. They all began screaming. Not in fear. In warning. And then Ethan saw it. Far above the train. Something enormous was crawling across the roof again. Only now. He could finally see its shadow. The shadow stretched across the roof of the train like a living eclipse. Ethan couldn't make out its true shape. Every time he focused on one part of it, another disappeared. At first it resembled an enormous animal crawling on 4 limbs. Then it looked almost human. A second later. Neither description fit anymore. The creature seemed to reject being understood. Only one thing remained constant. Its size. Whatever moved above the train was longer than the locomotive itself. The carriage shook as its weight shifted from one roof to another. Heavy footsteps echoed overhead. 1. 2. 3. Then complete silence. Every passenger lowered their heads again. Even the inspector stepped away from Ethan and stood perfectly still in the aisle. Her pale face had lost every trace of authority. She looked frightened. Not of Ethan. Of whatever stood above them. A low scratching sound drifted through the wooden ceiling. Like hundreds of fingernails slowly dragging across polished oak. Ethan fought the urge to look upward. He remembered the warning. You don't ask questions about the roof. The scratching stopped directly above him. Then something impossible happened. The ceiling bent downward. Not breaking. Not cracking. It simply curved inward as though immense weight rested on the other side. The polished wood stretched several inches before slowly returning to its normal shape. Another bend appeared farther down the carriage. Then another. Something was walking upside down across the ceiling itself. The inspector quietly opened her leather book again. This time the pages were no longer blank. Words were appearing across them by themselves. Dark ink spread line by line without any pen touching the paper. She read silently. Then looked directly at Ethan. It changed. The gray-coated man immediately stepped between them. "Show me." She hesitated. For several seconds she refused. Finally she turned the book toward him. Ethan caught only a brief glimpse. At the top of the page stood his name. Beneath it, a single sentence. Passenger remembers previous journey. The gray-coated man's expression froze. "That's impossible." The inspector slowly nodded. "I know." She looked toward Ethan again. "When did you remember?" "I didn't." "You did." "I've never been here." The inspector didn't answer. Instead she asked something that chilled him even more. "What was your seat number?" Ethan frowned. "I never had one." Silence filled the carriage. Even the scratching above them had stopped. The inspector slowly looked toward the empty velvet seat marked 27. Then back at Ethan. "No." Her whisper was almost inaudible. "It can't be." Ethan followed her gaze. Seat 27 remained empty. Exactly as before. Then, very slowly, the seatbelt folded itself closed. No hands touched it. The velvet cushion sank slightly. As though someone invisible had just sat down. The gray-coated man stepped backward. His breathing became uneven. He came back. The inspector quietly closed her book. "We're too late." Ethan felt the temperature inside the carriage drop. Frost slowly spread across every window. Outside, the white fog darkened into deep gray. Shapes moved inside it. Dozens. Hundreds. Keeping pace beside the train. Not running anymore. Walking. Perfectly synchronized. The frost covering the windows suddenly began melting. Not from warmth. From something pressing against the glass from outside. A human hand. Then another. Then dozens. Countless palms slid across every window. No faces. Only hands. Every one left dark fingerprints that refused to fade. The little boy began crying silently. No sound escaped him. His mother hugged him tightly while staring at the floor. The businessman closed his eyes. The elderly woman whispered a prayer Ethan couldn't understand. No one looked outside. No one except him. The hands continued multiplying. Soon every inch of glass disappeared beneath them. Hundreds of fingers tapped gently against the windows. Not randomly. Rhythmically. Tap. 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 3 taps. Exactly like the knocks on the ceiling. The inspector suddenly spoke. "They've found him." The gray-coated man looked toward Ethan. "You still have the letter." Ethan nodded. "Don't lose it." "Why?" "Because it doesn't belong to your father." Ethan stared. "What?" The man swallowed slowly. "Your father never wrote that letter." Every muscle in Ethan's body tensed. "The handwriting." "I know. It's identical." "Because he copied it." A chill spread through Ethan's chest. "Copied whose handwriting?" The gray-coated man looked toward seat 27. His answer came almost as a whisper. "Yours." Before Ethan could react, the carriage lights went out. Complete darkness swallowed the train. Only pale moonlight filtered through the hundreds of hands covering the windows. Then, a soft voice came from the empty seat behind him. His own voice. Older. Calmer. "I told him to warn you." Ethan spun around. Seat 27 was no longer empty. A man sat there. He looked almost 70 years old. Gray hair. Deep wrinkles. The same scar above his left eyebrow that Ethan had received as a child. The same eyes. The same face. Only decades older. The old man looked at Ethan with overwhelming sadness. "I finally found you." Ethan couldn't speak. His older self smiled weakly. "We don't have much time." The footsteps returned above the roof. Closer than ever. The old man slowly raised his eyes toward the ceiling. For the first time. Ethan saw genuine terror on his own face. Then the roof split open with a deafening crack. Long black fingers reached through the broken wood. And something began climbing into the carriage. The roof exploded inward. Splintered oak rained across the carriage as long black fingers wrapped around the broken beams. They were impossibly thin, each one longer than a man's body, covered in skin so dark it reflected no light at all. Every passenger remained frozen. No one screamed. No one ran. It was as though they had witnessed this countless times before. The thing above the train pulled itself downward with terrifying patience. First came the fingers. Then an arm. Another. A third. There should not have been that many. The limbs unfolded from the darkness like branches growing in reverse, bending at angles no living creature should survive. Finally, a face appeared. Except it wasn't one face. It changed every second. A frightened child. An elderly woman. A soldier. A young mother. A businessman. One face melted into another so quickly that Ethan's eyes struggled to follow. Every expression carried the same emotion. Loss. Not pain. Not anger. Only unbearable loss. The creature lowered itself halfway into the carriage. Its head nearly touched the floor despite the roof remaining several feet above. The inspector immediately stepped aside. She lowered her head. Not in fear. In respect. The gray-coated man's voice trembled. It came itself. Ethan whispered. "What is it?" No one answered. The creature slowly turned dozens of changing faces toward him. Then every mouth opened together. Thousands of overlapping voices filled the carriage. "We found you." The words echoed inside Ethan's mind more than through the air. His ears rang. His vision blurred. The older version of himself sitting in seat 27 suddenly stood. "No." His voice carried unexpected strength. "You can't have him." The creature tilted hundreds of heads simultaneously. "You promised." The old Ethan slowly nodded. "I know. I changed my mind." Every passenger gasped. The inspector closed her eyes. The gray-coated man looked horrified. "You never say that." The creature became perfectly still. Even the train seemed to stop moving. Silence stretched across the carriage. Then, every face on the creature smiled. "You don't get to decide anymore." One impossibly long arm shot forward. The older Ethan pushed the attack aside with surprising speed. His hand struck the creature's wrist. The impact echoed like thunder. The entire carriage shook violently. Windows shattered outward. The train lurched from side to side. Outside, the endless fog twisted into enormous spirals. For a brief second Ethan saw what lay beyond it. Not another landscape. Not another station. Tracks. Millions of railway tracks stretching forever beneath a black sky. Countless trains moved across them. Some old. Some modern. Some unlike anything ever built by human hands. Every train disappeared into distant darkness. Every one traveled toward the same place. Black Hollow. The vision lasted only an instant before the fog swallowed everything again. The older Ethan stumbled backward. His hands shook. "I can't stop it much longer." Ethan stared at him. "Who are you?" The old man smiled sadly. "I'm what happens if you stay." Every word felt like a hammer striking Ethan's chest. "No. I boarded this train. I asked the same questions. I tried to save everyone." He glanced toward the creature. "I failed." The inspector quietly stepped closer. Her voice had become almost gentle. "He remembers now." The older Ethan nodded. "More than he should." She looked toward Ethan. "You think this train carries passengers?" "It doesn't. It carries choices." Ethan frowned. "What does that mean?" The gray-coated man answered. "Every person here once reached a moment they couldn't let go of." The businessman tightened his grip on the old photograph. The elderly woman held her cross. The little boy hugged the broken toy train. They each refused to lose something. So the train offered another way. Ethan looked around. They're trapped. No. The gray-coated man's answer came quietly. They're waiting. For what? For someone willing to take their place. The realization hit Ethan like ice water. Every passenger looked at him. Not with hatred. Not with cruelty. With hope. The businessman whispered. I'm sorry. The elderly woman silently wept. The little boy hid behind his mother. They weren't waiting to escape. They were waiting. For Ethan. The creature lowered another face toward him. This one remained unchanged. It was his father's. Exactly as Ethan remembered him. The same warm eyes. The same tired smile. Ethan. His knees weakened instantly. Dad. I've missed you. The voice was perfect. Every word carried the same comfort Ethan had remembered since childhood. The older Ethan shouted. Don't listen. The creature ignored him. You've been looking for answers. I can give them to you. I can bring him back. Ethan's breathing became uneven. The face continued smiling. You've spent 25 years wondering what happened. You don't have to wonder anymore. The older Ethan grabbed Ethan's shoulder. That's not him. But it knows everything he ever remembered. The creature slowly extended one black hand. Come home. For one dangerous moment. Ethan wanted to believe it. Then he noticed something. His father's wedding ring. It was on the wrong hand. A tiny mistake. Almost invisible. But impossible. His father had always worn it on his left hand. Always. The smile remained. Yet now it looked rehearsed. Copied. The creature hadn't remembered his father. It had only remembered the memories of people who had known him. Ethan slowly stepped backward. You're not him. Every face disappeared. The creature's expression hardened. Thousands of mouths opened at once. We're all that's left of him. The train whistle screamed louder than ever before. Ahead. For the first time. A station appeared through the fog. A weathered black sign stood beside the tracks. Its white letters glowed unnaturally bright. Black Hollow. Final stop. The train began slowing as Black Hollow emerged from the fog. At first, Ethan thought it was an ordinary town. Rows of houses stood beneath dim streetlights. Storefronts lined a quiet main street. A church steeple rose above the rooftops, its bell tower disappearing into low clouds. Then he noticed what was wrong. Nothing moved. Not a curtain. Not a tree branch. Not even the smoke from the chimneys. The entire town looked like a photograph. Frozen. The locomotive rolled past the first houses. Every window revealed people standing perfectly still inside. A family gathered around a dinner table. A teacher facing a classroom. A barber with scissors raised halfway through a haircut. A little girl holding a birthday cake. No one blinked. Time itself had stopped. The creature slowly withdrew through the broken roof. It did not leave. It simply waited above the carriage once more. The older Ethan exhaled quietly. It never comes into Black Hollow. Why? It doesn't have to. The train stopped. The conductor's voice echoed through the speakers. Final destination. All remaining passengers. Please remember. For the first time since Ethan boarded the train. Every passenger stood. One after another, they walked toward the exit. Not hurriedly. Not reluctantly. As though they had rehearsed this journey for years. The businessman placed the faded photograph on his seat before leaving. The elderly woman laid her silver cross beside the window. The little boy carefully left his broken toy train on the floor. Each passenger abandoned the object they had protected during the journey. The inspector quietly watched them go. No longer an authority. Only another witness. Ethan looked toward the older version of himself. They're leaving. The old man nodded. They finally remembered enough. Where are they going? Home. Ethan frowned. But there is no town. The older Ethan smiled. There never was. Those words echoed inside Ethan's mind. He stepped off the train. The platform felt warm beneath his shoes. Black Hollow appeared completely empty. No station workers. No travelers. Only silent streets stretching beneath an endless gray sky. The passengers walked away in different directions. One by one. They faded. Not disappeared. Simply became transparent until nothing remained. The businessman vanished while crossing the street. The elderly woman disappeared beside the church. The little boy smiled once before dissolving into sunlight that somehow existed beneath the gray sky. None of them looked back. Ethan turned slowly. The train remained behind him. The gray-coated man stepped onto the platform. For the first time, he removed the gold pocket watch from his coat. He opened it. The hands had begun moving. Midnight. Exactly. He closed the watch again. My time is over. What do you mean? The man smiled gently. My name is Samuel. It was the first time Ethan had learned his name. I've ridden this train for 43 years. Ethan stared. You can leave now. Samuel nodded. I already have. Before Ethan could ask another question, Samuel slowly faded away. Within seconds, only his pocket watch remained on the platform. It fell softly onto the wooden boards. Ticking. For the first time. Ethan picked it up. Inside the lid, a small engraving caught his attention. To Samuel Carter. Love, Dad. Carter. His own family name. His breath caught. He looked back toward the empty space where Samuel had stood. A terrible realization settled over him. Samuel wasn't a stranger. He was family. Someone erased from every photograph. Someone no one remembered. The older Ethan quietly approached. You've started seeing the truth. Who was he? A brother. Ethan froze. My father had no brother. The older Ethan looked at him sadly. That's what everyone remembers. The wind finally began blowing through Black Hollow. For the first time, the frozen curtains moved. The church bell rang once. Far away, a dog barked. The town was waking. Not because morning had come. Because Ethan had arrived. The older Ethan pointed toward the center of town. There. In the distance stood a large brick building. Unlike every other structure, it had no windows. Only a single black door. Above it hung a weathered sign. The Archive. Ethan felt an inexplicable pull toward it. What is that place? The reason your father came. And the reason I never left. As they walked through the silent streets, Ethan noticed framed photographs hanging in every storefront window. Thousands of them. Families. Children. Couples. Graduation ceremonies. Wedding days. Ordinary moments. Then he looked closer. Every single photograph had one thing in common. One person had been carefully cut out. Sometimes a child. Sometimes a husband. Sometimes a grandmother. Perfect empty silhouettes remained where they had once stood. The older Ethan spoke quietly. Every person forgotten by the world ends up here. Ethan stopped walking. You mean, they're erased? They still existed. But memory has limits. He looked toward the black building. The archive keeps what everyone else loses. They reached the massive door. Without anyone touching it. It slowly opened inward. Beyond it stretched an endless hallway lined with towering shelves. Millions of boxes filled the darkness. Every box carried a single name. Some looked brand new. Others had gathered centuries of dust. The air smelled of old paper and rain. Somewhere deep inside the impossible building. A page turned by itself. Then another. Then hundreds. As though the archive had just realized. Its newest visitor had arrived. The archive felt larger than the town itself. The moment Ethan crossed the threshold, the sounds of Black Hollow disappeared behind him. The wind stopped. The church bell faded into silence. Even his own footsteps seemed strangely muted, as though the building absorbed every sound before it could echo. Towering shelves stretched beyond sight in every direction. Some climbed so high they vanished into darkness. Others disappeared down endless corridors that bent in impossible angles. There were no windows. No visible ceiling. Only countless rows of wooden boxes, leather journals, glass bottles, and faded photographs arranged with unsettling precision. Every shelf carried brass plaques. Forgotten fathers. Forgotten children. Forgotten promises. Forgotten names. The word sent a chill through Ethan's body. The older version of himself walked several steps ahead. His movements had become slower since leaving the train. His shoulders seemed heavier. As though every step inside the archive stole another piece of him. "You've been here before." The old man smiled without turning around. "So have you. I've never seen this place." "You don't remember seeing it." They stopped before a massive oak desk. It stood alone in the middle of an enormous circular chamber. No one sat behind it. Yet a thick ledger slowly opened by itself. Its yellowed pages turned one after another. Finally. They stopped. Fresh black ink appeared across the paper without anyone writing. Ethan Carter. Arrived. The next line remained blank. Waiting. Ethan stared. What is this? The record. Of what? The decision you haven't made yet. His heartbeat quickened. A drawer beneath the desk slid open. Inside rested hundreds of fountain pens. Every one looked different. Silver. Ivory. Gold. Wood carved with ancient symbols. The older Ethan carefully closed the drawer. Don't touch them. Why? Because the moment you sign. He stopped speaking. Ethan looked directly at him. What happens? The old man finally answered. The archive remembers you. And everyone else forgets. Silence settled over the chamber. Those words felt heavier than anything Ethan had heard since boarding the train. He thought about his apartment in Chicago. His editor. His friends. His neighbors. Would they simply forget? The old Ethan nodded as though hearing the thought itself. You won't disappear. They simply won't remember you ever existed. Ethan stepped away from the desk. I'm not signing anything. No one ever plans to. A sudden rustling echoed somewhere deep inside the shelves. Not footsteps. Pages. Millions of pages turning simultaneously. The sound grew louder. Closer. The old Ethan's face changed instantly. It knows you're here. What? The keeper. The lights flickered. One by one, lanterns hanging between the shelves began extinguishing themselves. Darkness spread across the endless library. Only the desk remained illuminated. The rustling became almost deafening. Entire shelves shifted silently. Books slid in and out by themselves. Boxes opened. Old letters floated gently through the air before returning to their places. The archive wasn't merely storing memories. It was alive. A low voice drifted through the darkness. Not from one direction. From everywhere. Another Carter. Ethan turned in circles. No one. Only shelves disappearing into shadow. The voice spoke again. Your family always comes back. A tall figure slowly emerged between two distant bookcases. Unlike the creature on the train, this being looked almost human. An elderly man. Thin. Impossibly tall. Dressed in a black coat that touched the floor. His silver hair fell almost to his waist. Round spectacles rested low on his nose. In one hand he carried a single enormous key. In the other, a thick leather-bound book. Every movement was calm. Measured. Patient. He stopped beside the desk. His pale gray eyes settled on Ethan. You look exactly like your father. Ethan's throat tightened. You knew him. I remember everyone. The old man's expression remained unreadable. I am the keeper. The title felt strangely familiar. Ethan glanced toward the older version of himself. The old Ethan lowered his head respectfully. Not from fear. From acceptance. The keeper slowly opened the enormous book. Thousands of names filled its pages. Without touching them. One page turned on its own. Thomas Carter. Ethan's father's name. The keeper read quietly. Arrived. Searched. Refused. Returned. Ethan frowned. Returned. My father came home. The keeper looked directly into his eyes. No. He returned here. The room became impossibly cold. Ethan shook his head. He disappeared. He chose. The keeper closed the book gently. Every Carter makes a choice. Ethan looked toward the older version of himself. He already knew the answer before asking. And you? The old man smiled sadly. I stayed. The keeper nodded once. He became one of my librarians. Ethan looked around the endless shelves. A terrible realization settled over him. All those endless corridors. All those millions of boxes. Someone maintained them. Someone organized every forgotten memory. Someone ensured nothing was ever truly lost. The keeper quietly spoke again. Memory cannot be destroyed. It can only change owners. A distant bell echoed somewhere far below the archive. Once. Twice. 3 times. The keeper looked upward. The train has departed. The older Ethan closed his eyes. So soon. The keeper's expression grew unexpectedly solemn. It has found another passenger. Ethan felt a knot tighten in his stomach. What passenger? Instead of answering, the keeper handed him an old photograph. It showed a young woman standing beside the abandoned station where Ethan had boarded the train. She looked frightened. She held the exact same yellow letter Ethan had received. Written on the back was tomorrow's date. Across the bottom. One name. Claire Carter. Ethan's younger sister. His breathing stopped. She had died in a car accident. 8 years ago. The keeper quietly closed the book. Are you certain she did? The photograph slipped from Ethan's fingers. It landed softly on the wooden floor, yet the sound echoed through the archive like a gunshot. Claire. His younger sister. The last time he had seen her was 8 years earlier. The police report had been clear. Her car had left the highway during a rainstorm. There had been no witnesses. No skid marks. Only an empty vehicle discovered the following morning. Her body had never been found. For years everyone had accepted the explanation that the river had carried her away. Even Ethan had eventually stopped asking questions. Now. The keeper calmly bent down, picked up the photograph, and placed it back onto the desk. She came here. Ethan felt his heartbeat pounding in his ears. No. The keeper did not argue. He simply opened another page of the enormous book. Without hesitation, Ethan stepped forward. Across the top was written. Claire Carter. Below it, in flawless black ink, appeared 4 short entries. Arrived. Remembered. Refused. The final line remained unfinished. Only a single word had been written. Waiting. Ethan looked up. What does that mean? The keeper closed the book. It means her story never ended. The older Ethan quietly lowered his head. I hoped you would never find that page. You knew. I remember everything. Anger rushed through Ethan's body. You let me believe she was dead. I let you live. Those words struck harder than shouting ever could. The older Ethan slowly walked toward one of the towering shelves. Thousands of small wooden drawers covered its surface. He stopped before one marked simply. Carter. His trembling fingers pulled it open. Inside rested dozens of objects. A faded baseball glove. A music box. A broken wristwatch. A dried rose. A toy airplane. A birthday candle. Each item looked painfully ordinary. The older Ethan picked up the baseball glove. You lost this when you were 11. Ethan stared. He had spent weeks searching for it. His father had helped him look through every room in the house. They never found it. It never disappeared. The older Ethan gently placed it back. You forgot where it mattered. He picked up the music box. Claire played this every Christmas. Ethan immediately recognized the melody before it even opened. He hadn't thought about it in nearly 20 years. Not because he chose to forget. Because the memory had quietly slipped away. The older Ethan smiled sadly. The archive keeps everything the world lets go. Ethan slowly turned in place. Millions of shelves. Millions of forgotten lives. Forgotten birthdays. Forgotten first loves. Forgotten lullabies. Forgotten names. Nothing truly vanished. Everything arrived here. A distant whistle echoed through the impossible building. Not loud. But close enough to shake the lanterns. The keeper looked toward the darkness. It has arrived. Ethan frowned. What? The next train. The older Ethan suddenly grabbed his arm. We have to move. Before Ethan could respond, every shelf inside the archive began shifting. Entire bookcases slid across the floor without making a sound. Passageways disappeared. New corridors formed. The building itself was changing. The keeper remained perfectly still. It knows you've seen too much. The lights dimmed. Far away. Footsteps echoed. Not from above. Not below. Ahead. Slow. Measured. As though someone walked through the archive with absolute certainty. The older Ethan's expression filled with fear. No. Ethan looked toward him. What is it? The conductors. Plural. Another whistle echoed. This time much closer. 3 figures emerged between the moving shelves. All wore the same black railway uniforms. Black caps. White gloves. Silver buttons polished to perfection. None of them had faces. Where their features should have been. Only smooth pale skin remained. Each carried an old brass lantern. Inside every lantern burned blue fire. The conductors stopped simultaneously. One of them slowly lifted a small ticket punch. Another unfolded a long passenger list. The third simply stood motionless. The keeper spoke quietly. They've come to collect. Ethan took a step backward. I never bought a ticket. The keeper looked directly into his eyes. You inherited one. Silence. Then. The faceless conductor holding the passenger list slowly turned a page. A fresh line appeared. Without anyone writing it. Ethan Carter. Seat 27. The older Ethan whispered. It's choosing. The lantern suddenly flared brighter. Blue light flooded the archive. Every forgotten object on the surrounding shelves began vibrating. Photographs fluttered. Letters unfolded. Pocket watches started ticking. Wedding rings rolled slowly across wooden shelves. Millions of forgotten memories awakened at once. The conductors began walking. Not quickly. They didn't need to. No matter how fast Ethan backed away. They remained exactly the same distance from him. The older Ethan pushed him toward a narrow passage between 2 enormous shelves. Run. What about you? The old man smiled. I've already lived your future. Ethan refused to move. We leave together. A tear slowly rolled down the older Ethan's face. You still think that's possible? He gently removed the yellow letter from Ethan's jacket pocket. The same letter that had started everything. He unfolded it one final time. The words had changed. No longer. If you ever see the last train to Black Hollow, do not get on it. Now it read. Break the circle. The older Ethan folded the letter and handed it back. You were never supposed to obey it. You were supposed to finish it. The conductors were only a few steps away now. The blue flames inside their lanterns grew brighter with every second. The keeper quietly stepped aside. Not stopping them. Not helping them. Simply watching. As though this moment had happened before. Many times. The older Ethan looked into Ethan's eyes one last time. Then he whispered 4 words that made everything suddenly fit together. You are the first. Before Ethan could ask what he meant. The older version of himself turned toward the conductors. And surrendered. The older Ethan walked toward the conductors without hesitation. Not because he had surrendered. Because he had finally remembered why he had stayed. The three faceless conductors stopped only a few feet from him. Blue fire flickered inside their lanterns, casting long shadows across the endless shelves of the archive. The first conductor raised his ticket punch. The second unfolded the passenger ledger. The third extended one empty hand. The older Ethan smiled. "I've carried this ticket long enough." He reached into his coat and removed an old railway ticket. Yellow. Worn. The exact same ticket Ethan's father had once held. Seat 27. The moment he released it, the ticket burst into white flames. Not blue. Not black. Pure white. For the first time, the conductors hesitated. The keeper slowly closed his enormous book. A quiet smile appeared on his ancient face. "So. You finally remembered." The older Ethan nodded. "I was never meant to become seat 27. I became it because I believed there was no other ending." He looked directly at Ethan. "But you changed that." The conductors suddenly rushed forward. Not walking. Gliding across the floor with terrifying speed. The older Ethan stepped directly into their path. The archive shook violently. Entire shelves collapsed. Millions of photographs burst into the air like birds escaping a cage. Letters. Diaries. Wedding rings. Children's drawings. Every forgotten memory flew through the endless hall. The keeper raised the enormous key he had carried since Ethan first arrived. For the first time. He used it. The key struck the floor. A deafening crack echoed through the archive. Every drawer burst open simultaneously. Millions of forgotten names escaped into the air as glowing streams of light. The conductors stopped instantly. Their lanterns flickered wildly. The smooth skin covering their faces began cracking. Beneath it, human eyes slowly appeared. Then mouths. Then expressions. Not monsters. People. Ordinary people. Confused. Afraid. They looked around as though waking from an endless sleep. The older Ethan smiled. "They remember." The keeper quietly nodded. "The archive has opened." Ethan suddenly understood. The archive had never been a prison. It had been a vault. Every forgotten memory had been locked away to preserve the balance. Now, the memories were returning to their owners. Everywhere. The walls of the archive began dissolving. Beyond them Ethan saw impossible scenes. An old woman suddenly remembering the face of her first love. A soldier recalling the name of the friend he had lost decades earlier. A child recognizing a forgotten lullaby. Families embracing without understanding why tears filled their eyes. The entire world was remembering. The conductors slowly lowered their lanterns. Blue fire disappeared forever. One by one. They faded into ordinary men. The older Ethan turned toward the keeper. "What happens now?" The keeper looked around the collapsing archive. "My work is finished." The endless shelves continued disappearing. Millions of boxes opened themselves. Nothing remained hidden. The keeper closed his great book for the final time. The title, which Ethan had never noticed before, slowly became visible. Everything that was forgotten. The old man gently placed the book upon the desk. Then he, too, began fading. "I was never the keeper. I was only the last person remembered." With those words, he vanished. The desk crumbled into dust. The ceiling disappeared. The archive dissolved into brilliant white light. Only Ethan and his older self remained. Silence surrounded them. The older Ethan looked strangely peaceful. "You know what comes next?" Ethan nodded slowly. "You disappear." The old man smiled. "No. I become what I was before all this." He reached into his pocket. Removed a small photograph. It showed Ethan as a little boy sitting on the shoulders of a smiling man. Not his father. Another man. Younger than Samuel. Laughing. Uncle Samuel. The forgotten brother. Ethan felt tears filling his eyes. He finally remembered him. Not because someone told him. Because the memory had always been there. Waiting. The older Ethan handed him the photograph. You've broken the circle. You'll never ride this train. And neither will I. His body slowly became transparent. I finally get to go home. The last thing Ethan saw was his older self smiling. Not sadly. Thankfully. Then he was gone. Everything became white. When Ethan opened his eyes, he was standing on the abandoned railway platform. Morning sunlight filtered through the trees. The station was old again. Broken windows. Rusted tracks. Weeds growing through cracked concrete. No train. No fog. No archive. Only birds singing in the distance. His car remained parked exactly where he had left it. His phone displayed 7:42 a.m. Several missed calls from work. Nothing unusual. For a long time he simply stood there, wondering if any of it had happened. Then he looked down. Resting in his hand was an old gold pocket watch. Inside the lid was a familiar engraving. To Samuel Carter. Love, Dad. This time, he remembered exactly who Samuel was. And for the first time in 25 years. So did everyone else. Ethan never became famous for discovering Black Hollow. No newspaper ever published his story. No television station ever invited him to explain what had happened that impossible night. More than once he sat alone in his apartment, staring at a blank document on his computer. His fingers rested on the keyboard for hours, yet every sentence felt wrong before it was even finished. He could describe the abandoned station. He could describe the black locomotive. He could describe the endless fog, the conductors, the keeper, and the impossible archive. But none of those words captured the truth. Because Black Hollow had never been about ghosts. It had never been about monsters. It had always been about memory. About the invisible parts of people that slowly disappear as years pass. The article was never written. Instead, Ethan returned to ordinary journalism. Political corruption. Corporate fraud. Missing persons. Stories with evidence, witnesses, and documents. Stories the world could understand. Yet the world itself had begun changing in quiet, almost invisible ways. An elderly woman suddenly remembered the lullaby her mother had sung every night before bed, despite insisting for decades that she had forgotten the melody forever. A retired firefighter unexpectedly recalled the name of a little girl he had rescued 30 years earlier. A married couple rediscovered an old family photograph stored in their attic. For years they had believed the empty space beside them had been damaged by sunlight. Now there was a smiling young man standing there. Both of them recognized him instantly. He had been the husband's older brother. Neither could explain how they had ever forgotten he existed. Stories like that began appearing everywhere. People laughed through tears after remembering forgotten birthdays. Children recognized songs they had supposedly never heard. Old friends called each other after suddenly recalling promises made decades before. No one connected these strange moments. The world simply accepted them as forgotten memories returning on their own. Only Ethan understood. The archive had opened. Nothing was being returned. Everything had simply been allowed to go home. Months later, Ethan visited the cemetery where his parents rested. Rain had just ended. Drops of water still clung to the polished granite headstones, reflecting pale morning sunlight. He carried 3 white lilies. One for his mother. One for his father. And one for the brother his father had lost twice. The first time. To Black Hollow. The second. To the world's forgotten memory. But now another gravestone stood beside them. Simple. Modest. Freshly carved. Samuel Carter. Beloved brother. Beloved son. Ethan stood there for a long time. He smiled without realizing it. For the first time in his life, he actually remembered his uncle. Not because someone had told him. Because the memories had always belonged to him. He remembered sitting on Samuel's shoulders during a county fair. He remembered learning to skip stones across the river while Samuel laughed every time Ethan threw one straight into the water. He remembered birthday parties, Christmas mornings, family photographs. Dozens of memories had quietly returned, fitting perfectly into places that had always felt strangely empty. He finally understood why those empty spaces had existed. Someone had been missing. Not physically. From memory itself. Footsteps approached across the wet grass. Ethan turned. A woman stood only a few yards away. For several seconds neither of them spoke. Claire. She looked older than the 20-year-old sister he remembered losing. Time had continued moving for her. Soft lines framed her smile. Her hair had grown longer. Yet her eyes remained exactly the same. She looked at Ethan with quiet uncertainty. As though she recognized him before understanding why. Then tears slowly filled her eyes. "I've been looking for you." Her voice broke halfway through the sentence. Ethan crossed the distance between them without thinking. They embraced tightly. Neither wanted to let go. There were too many questions. Too many missing years. Yet somehow, none of them seemed important anymore. Over the following months, Claire shared everything she could remember. Fragments. Never a complete story. She remembered standing on an empty railway platform. A black train waiting in silence. A yellow letter folded inside her coat. She remembered a man in a gray overcoat smiling sadly. She remembered endless shelves stretching farther than sight. Most of all, she remembered someone telling her to keep walking no matter what happened behind her. Everything after that became light. Then rain. Then waking beside an unfamiliar highway at sunrise. Her memories faded whenever she tried to hold them for too long. Like dreams disappearing after waking. Ethan never tried to force them back. He had learned something inside Black Hollow. Not every forgotten thing needed to be remembered forever. Some memories returned only long enough to heal what had once been broken. Life continued. Claire married. She had children. Eventually Ethan became the uncle he himself had once forgotten. Every family gathering felt strangely precious. Not because it was perfect. Because he understood how fragile memory truly was. Years became decades. His hair slowly turned silver. His hands carried the marks of age. The gold pocket watch remained inside a small wooden box in his study. It never stopped ticking. Not once. Sometimes, during quiet evenings, Ethan would open the lid simply to hear its steady rhythm. Tick. 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 The sound reminded him that time had finally begun moving forward again. Every birthday. Every sunrise. Every ordinary Monday. Nothing remained frozen anymore. One autumn evening, when Ethan had grown into an old man, he traveled to Chicago for what would become his final book signing. Readers filled the small bookstore. Most thanked him for telling stories that made people appreciate ordinary life. None of them knew why those stories felt so personal. Afterward, Ethan chose to walk home instead of calling a taxi. Rain drifted gently across the city. Streetlights reflected in wet pavement. The world felt peaceful. He arrived at Union Station shortly before midnight. Modern trains arrived and departed beneath brilliant electric lights. Travelers hurried past carrying luggage. Children laughed. Announcements echoed overhead. Everything looked completely ordinary. Then, silence. Every announcement stopped in the middle of a sentence. Every digital clock froze. 11:59. The rain itself seemed to pause in the air. Crowds continued walking as though nothing unusual had happened. Only Ethan noticed. Far beyond the active platforms lay an abandoned track hidden behind rusted fencing. A place no train had used for decades. Soft yellow light slowly appeared within the darkness. Then came the familiar whistle. Warm. Gentle. Nothing like the terrifying sound he remembered. The black locomotive emerged once more. But it had changed. The paint no longer swallowed light. It reflected the golden glow of dawn. Its brass fittings shone brilliantly. Flowers climbed along the sides of the carriages. The destination board illuminated. Last stop. A pause. Then new letters slowly appeared. Home. The train stopped quietly. One carriage door opened. Warm light spilled across the forgotten platform. Inside stood familiar faces. His father smiled exactly as Ethan remembered him. Beside him stood Samuel, no longer tired, gently holding the old pocket watch. The gray-coated man smiled peacefully. The little boy carried an unbroken toy train. The elderly woman still wore her silver cross. The businessman laughed beside the children whose names he had finally remembered. None of them looked trapped. None looked lost. They looked exactly as people should look after finally finding their way home. Ethan smiled. He wasn't afraid. There were no more questions left to ask. He looked once toward the busy station behind him. The clock started moving again. People hurried to catch their trains. Someone laughed. Someone said goodbye. Life continued exactly as it should. Ethan reached into his pocket. The old pocket watch had finally stopped. Its hands rested together at 12. He gently placed it on the empty wooden bench beside the abandoned platform. A gift for whoever might one day need to remember. Then he climbed aboard. The door closed softly behind him. For the first time, the train moved with sound. The steady rhythm of steel wheels echoed across the tracks. Not haunting. Comforting. The whistle rose one final time into the night. The locomotive disappeared beyond the city lights. Not into darkness. Not into fog. Into a horizon glowing with the first light of morning. The following day, a railway employee discovered an old gold pocket watch resting on a forgotten bench beside an abandoned track. Inside its lid was the familiar engraving. To Samuel Carter. Love, Dad. Beneath it, freshly carved in careful handwriting, were 5 final words. No one was forgotten anymore. And somewhere, beyond the reach of every map, every station, and every memory, the last train made one final journey. Not toward Black Hollow, but toward home.